This morning I am scheduled to be at the chapel. So, whenever that happens, then I feel like I need to hurry a bit. I think I need to rush a little bit, but I'm going to try not to rush. I was in a little bit of uh, a toss-up about what I should share this morning. Actually, yeah, my mind has been in a bit of a toss-up about what I should talk about. I've been, for some reason, and whenever there's a reason like this, I believe it is God who is pushing my mind. I've been thinking a lot about certain prophetic principles, certain prophetic ideas. I know that on Sabbath mornings we normally have a kind of devotional or an exhortational type of presentation, and we focus on prophecy in the evening. But my mind has been so focused on this issue that I'm going to talk about this prophetic issue this morning with a hope that it will be a blessing to everybody. I mean, the main thing I can see is a further insight into the wisdom of God and into the amazing way in which God does things. So anyway, I'm going to go straight into my study by sharing my screen and using my PowerPoint presentation. Now, there are two questions that there are more than two questions. There are a few questions that disturb me with regards to the prophecies. There are some questions that I don't have any clear answers to. And there are a couple of them in the book of Daniel that have been a puzzle in my mind. And I think that, I'm not going to say I have complete answers or perfect answers, but God has led my mind in a certain way that I think I am beginning to see a little better. And that's what I want to share this morning. And I hope I don't leave anybody behind. I want to be as simple as possible and try to break things down as much as I can. And I hope that by God's grace, everybody will be able to follow what I'm trying to say. Now, one of the questions that I brought up a few weeks ago when we were going through the book of Daniel was the question of this horn. Now, everybody, I think, will understand, will remember that Daniel had a vision where he saw a ram and a he-goat fighting. Now, the ram represented Medo-Persia, and the goat represented Greece. Now, what we are told is that a horn was on the head of the goat, which represented the first king, who was Alexander the Great. The horn was broken, and four smaller horns came up, as we see in this little circle at the top, represented there. And then afterwards, out of one of them, some people say it could be out of one of the four winds, because it says the horns came out towards the four winds. So it could be that out of one of the four winds, there came another horn. But the way it reads, it kind of sounds like out of one of those four little horns, there came another horn that became very great. Now, of course, if you are familiar with the prophecy, you know that people who are of our persuasion, they say that this little horn represents Rome. There are four kingdoms represented in Daniel: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and the fourth kingdom is always Rome. So the question was, okay, if you have the ram that is Medo-Persia, you have the goat that is Greece, then the next one you're expecting to see is Rome, because Rome follows. But instead of seeing another animal, what we see is a horn. And the question is, why would God represent Rome as a horn? Why not another animal? And furthermore, it looks like this horn is coming out of Greece. And everybody knows Rome did not come out of Greece. So, that is a problem. And because of this, many people say that this little horn was actually a Greek king by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, there are so many reasons why that does not fit, so many reasons why that does not make sense. But the question remains, why does God represent Rome as a horn? All right, that's one of the questions I want to try to answer today. Second question. It has to do with the verse that we're all familiar with, Daniel 8 and verse 14, which says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. If you have come from a background of Seventh-day Adventism, this is very familiar to you. But there are questions around it, and I'm going to highlight the question and hope again that I can present a meaningful suggested answer. Now let me read the verses 13 and 14, Daniel chapter 8. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint. The word saint means a holy one, so we're talking about angels here. Another angel said unto that certain angel which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice? I have put some alternative words in green because I believe that these are the words that should be there. The King James Version says the daily sacrifice. I think it means a sanctuary service, and I will explain why in our study this morning. How long shall be the vision concerning the daily or the sanctuary service, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, that should be 2,300 evenings and mornings. That's not an opinion. That's exactly what the original text says, evenings and mornings. Although the King James Version translated it as days. But God in the original said evenings and mornings. And there is always a reason for everything that God does. Why does he say evenings and mornings instead of days? It goes on to say, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And the word cleansed can also mean restored or vindicated or justified. I think restored is the correct word when you look at the context. Anyway, those are the questions. Why did God say evenings and mornings? And secondly, why did God represent Rome as a horn instead of as another beast? Because Rome was greater than Medo-Persia and Greece. So how could you represent Rome as just being a horn when the others are represented as animals? A horn is really just a part of an animal. So I'm going to try to give some answers today. Some of you will fully understand what I'm trying to say, and your interest may be aroused. Some of us, it may not be so, our minds might not be so focused, we might not understand perfectly what is the big thing, what is this about. And so it is really my desire and my hope that as we go through today, I can help you to understand why it is significant. All right, I'm going to try. I hope I can succeed. All right. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, there are certain time periods. And these time periods are always, well, not always, but they are stated in about 5 different ways. Why? I mean, if you're going to talk about a day represents a year, then tell us days. You know, or if you're going to say months are used, then give us months. But I wanted to notice how God does it, and I find this very interesting. In prophecy, first of all, he talks about days. The time periods are given as days, and the references are there. If you want to screenshot this, or it will be there on the recording, right? But here are the references where days are used, where God talks about time periods and he uses days. Secondly, he uses weeks. And there are the references again. He's talking about time periods and he prophecies dealing with time, and he talks about weeks. Can you guess where he goes next? Next he goes to months. And you see the references again there in Revelation. Days, weeks, months. Where do you think we're going to go next? If you said years, you're correct. Then he goes to years. He doesn't use the word years, but he talks about times, times and a half. And you can see when you look at it that a time is representing a year. Also in Daniel chapter 4, when Nebuchadnezzar was made mad like a cow, God said 7 times would pass over him. And those 7 times meant 7 years. So you see that a time is really a year. So look at how God gives us the prophecies. Days, weeks, months, years. There's one more. Where does he go next? Those are all the time periods. You have days, weeks, months, years. The only other place you can go is hours and minutes. All right, he's not going there. Days, weeks, months, and years. But there's one other time period that he gives. And it is evening and morning. That's also given as a time period in Daniel chapter 8 and verse 14. So these are the five ways in which God gives us time prophecy in the Bible. And in all the years I have been studying prophecy, all I ever learned, in all that I ever studied, read, all that I ever learned was that days represent years, weeks you convert them to days, and then you convert them to years, months you convert it to days, and then you convert that to years, and years, of course, you convert it to days, and then you go back to years. And everything adds up to the same time period, more or less, in most of them. And that's all. But I'm thinking about it, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, God does not just do things for entertainment. I mean, that's a beautiful thought that I would like all of us to bear in mind. God doesn't just do things because, okay, God is giving the prophecy and he says, okay, let me put in a little variety. I've been using days to represent years. Now I'm going to use weeks to represent years. And later on he says, that's a little boring. Let me use months now. God doesn't operate like that. If God does something differently, it's because there's a point behind it. One of the most interesting ways to study the Bible is when you read something, you think, what was God trying to say here? What was going through his mind? And that is not presumptuous. It's not presumptuous to ask what is going through God's mind, because many times you get into an argument with somebody, all right, and both of you are arguing back and forth and none of you can't seem to agree, like sometimes we have here on this platform, right? And one of the reasons is you're not understanding why the person is thinking the way he's thinking. You're not getting into his mind. So when he speaks, you're not hearing what he's saying. That's really a part of the problem. And so when God speaks and when God puts something in his word, part of the problem is, why was God thinking like this? What was he trying to say? It's not blasphemy to try to get into the mind of God, because God is the one who exposes his mind. When he gives us his word, he opens up his mind and he says, I want you to understand. So sometimes it's helpful if you say, what were you thinking when you said this? Why did you say it this way? So, you know what? I need to turn on my fan. I'm warming up. They start off pretty cool, but then it doesn't last. All right, so why does God give us this variation in the way he describes time? So we're going to look at that. So there are a couple of questions that come to my mind. I want to put them on the screen. Question number 1. Why does God give us the times using these different ways of measurement? Why does he do this? There's a reason. Secondly, why does God say evenings and mornings in Daniel chapter 8? Because whenever God talks about time, he talks about days. But in Daniel chapter 8, he does not say days. He says evenings and mornings. Those are 2 of the questions I want to try to answer today. Now, I hope I have gotten your interest. I mean, I know, I'm saying this again. I know that there are some people who, whenever it comes to prophecies like this, it's complicated. Their minds kind of shut off. I apologize, my people. I apologize, right? But I know it happens to some people. But I also know that, the study of prophecy is of acute importance. For God says that the wicked will do wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. So it takes an effort to understand some things, but it is worth it. Because our Father in heaven, He not only gave us the gospel that says, Jesus died for our sins, praise the Lord, amen, hallelujah, close the book and go home. There is a lot more in the book. And God wants us to understand it. God wants His people to be educated concerning His purposes. So I want to encourage us to make the effort that it takes to try to understand these prophecies. So, why is evenings and mornings used in Daniel 8? And let me remind you of the verse again. The angel in Daniel 8 verses 13 and 14 says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. But the original really says, and I have the NASB version, which actually gives you the more literal translation. He said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. So a lot of people say that because God says evenings and mornings, it must mean literal days. It cannot mean a day for a year. It cannot mean a day for a year, like in most prophecies. In most of these prophecies, we say one day represents a year. They say it cannot mean a day represents a year because God doesn't say day. God says evenings and mornings. And when you say evenings and mornings, the only thing that has an evening and has a morning is a literal day. If you use a day for a year, you cannot say evenings and mornings because a year does not have an evening and a year does not have a morning. So they say that this prophecy was actually a prophecy talking about literal days. It was not something that extended across thousands of years. And so they say it had to happen in the past with this Greek king named Antiochus Epiphanes. However, sometimes you just have to try to get a little deeper into the mind of God. So, first of all, I want to try to explain the question, why does God use these different ways of expressing the time? That's the first question I want to try to answer. God uses different ways to describe the time. He said, as I said, he said days, weeks, months, years, or times, and then he said evenings and mornings. Why does he do this? So I looked at all these verses and I noticed that there's a little bit of a pattern. I hope I'm not trying to force something into the verse, but I see a kind of pattern. And I want to share what I think I see. Days. When God talks about days, something jumps out at me. Whenever he talks about days, the verse focuses on some benefit that is to come to the kingdom. Now I believe what I'm seeing is that all of these are relating to something to do with the kingdom of God. So whenever God talks about prophecy and he uses the word days, it means that there's some special benefit that is coming to his people. So the word days, whenever the word days is used, you can say, okay, this has to do with a benefit that God is giving to his people or to his kingdom. God's special grace is going to be imparted. God's people are going to experience it in some significant way. Now let's look at the verses and see if this makes sense. So the first verse, Daniel 12 verses 11 to 12. See, God talks about 1,290 days. He uses days here. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. Days again. Now he's talking about days. And if you look at the text that is written in orange, you'll see that there's a blessing. So the verse says, from the time that the daily is taken away and the abomination that maketh desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. We are talking about days. And God says, there is a blessing. There is a blessing for the one that waits and comes to the 1,335 days. So God uses the word days, and he's talking about a special blessing for his people. So I'm making a connection that when God says days, there's some kind of special blessing. That's one place where we see this. Another verse is Revelation 11 and verse 3. And God talks about days again. I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days. Talks about days again. And what is the blessing? The special grace is that I will give power. God says, I will give power. When God imparts a special blessing to his people, he describes it. He describes the time in terms of days. Another one is Revelation 12 and verse 6, where it says, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,203 score days, 1,260 days. And what is a special blessing? There is a place that God has prepared for his church or for his kingdom at this time. Special benefit. And again, God describes it as happening in terms of days, at a point described as in days. One more. Revelation 11 verse 11. And after 3 days and a half, again he talks about days, the spirit of life from God entered into them. What is the benefit? God gives them the spirit of life. A great benefit from God comes to the 2 witnesses after 3.5 days. And they stood up on their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. So anyway, I looked at these 4 places in the prophecies where God describes he describes the time in terms of days. And I think in all of them you can see that they all have to do with some special benefit from God. God gives power. God prepares a place. God gives a spirit of life. So whenever you see days in the prophecy, it's like God is saying, at this point, something special, some special benefit will come to my people. That's why I'm using the word days. All right, that's what I think I see. We will look at the other expressions and see if they make similar sense. The next thing he talked about was weeks. So God is not using days anymore. Now he's talking about weeks. And I think when he talks about weeks, it means that it is something predestined. Something that God has predestined. Something that cannot change. It is ordained by God. It doesn't depend upon what anybody else does. God says, this will happen. This is going to happen. I am going to make it happen. I have ordained it. And so whenever we see the word weeks as the time period, you can say this is something predestinated by God. It doesn't depend upon the forces of evil or the forces of good or anybody's intervention. This is what God himself will do. All right, that's what I think I see. Let's see if the verses support it. First place we find this is Daniel 9 verses 24 and 25. God says 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. 70 weeks. There you see weeks. Are what? Determined. Who determined it? Who ordained it? Who predestined it? It was God who made this determination. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. And look what will happen. Finish the transgression. Nobody can stop that. Make an end of sin. God's work. Nobody else's. Make reconciliation for iniquity. God will do this. Bring in everlasting righteousness. The work of God and his Son. Nobody else. Seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. A divine work, preordained, predestinated, unstoppable, untouchable. And so God gives us the time periods in weeks. You know, we work it out and we say, okay, 70 weeks, that's 490 years. Why didn't God say 490 days? And then later on down here, he talks about 7 weeks. That's 49 years. Why didn't he say 49 days? Use days. No, no, no. Because his point is different. And then he goes on to talk about 62 weeks, which is kind of awkward because 62 times 7 is what? 62 times 7 to give you the amount of days and the amount of years. 400 and something, I think. Now, and yet he keeps on giving us weeks, weeks, weeks. It's because his point remains, and the point is, this is a divinely ordained plan. It doesn't depend upon the beast. It doesn't depend upon any of the beasts. It doesn't depend upon the people of God. It is God who is doing this. So I hope you understand what I'm saying. Where God used weeks, he's talking about something that is predestination, cannot change. And see, he continues to do it in the next few verses, 26 and 27. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. The death of Jesus had to be at the appointed time. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and so forth. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. This shows you that is 1 week is the work of God, is the work of Christ. And in the midst of the week, I mean, this phrase here, the midst of the week, is such a funny phrase, because why didn't God say, and after 3.5 days? Why didn't he say after 3.5 days or 3.5 years? Instead, he goes on talking about weeks, because it means the word weeks, the terminology, the time frame, weeks, it means that this is something that God has ordained and it cannot change. If he had said days, then it would not mean that God, it was foreordained. It would not mean that it was predestinated. Like when the beast persecutes the saints, for example, for so many days, God didn't foreordain that. Even though it happens, it's not predestinated. It's not something that God says, I am going to do. You see what I'm saying? But when it comes to what God ordains himself to do, and it cannot change, nothing can change it, then he uses the time period of weeks so we can understand. And right through, he's talking about weeks. He never changes and says days or months. It's weeks all the way through. And again, down at the end, it says, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined, what has been determined or preordained or decided beforehand, shall be poured upon the desolate. God's doing, God's work, God's destiny. So, that is what the use of the word weeks, the time period, that is why God uses it, in my estimation. I keep saying my estimation because you will understand, brothers and sisters, that this is kind of something that I am just beginning to sort out. It's new to me. And so I'm saying it's what I understand, because I'm not going to try to say that it's something I'm insisting that is flawless, but I want to share it while it's fresh in my mind, because I think it makes sense. The next thing is months. Why does God use months at times? What does months signify? And even before I go to this, I just want to make the point. This is kind of in harmony with some of the principles of understanding the prophecies. In other words, you look at physical things and they have a spiritual meaning. You look at times, and now we are seeing it has a spiritual meaning. It has a deeper meaning to do with spiritual things or non-physical things. Even though the times are there and the symbols are there, the beast and all the rest of it, the interpretation is on a deeper level. So months. What are the characteristics of months? Where months are used, I think you can see that it always uses months when the kingdom is oppressed. It is pressed down. It is under great oppression. And the reason is that Satan has received power. Different emphasis, God uses a different word. He uses the word months. So, let's look at the examples. In Revelation 11 verse 2 it says, "But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread underfoot 40 and 2 months." All right, God talks about months now. And what happens? The holy city is trodden underfoot. God's people are oppressed. Why? Because it is given to the Gentiles. Satan's people are given power. Satan's people are given power. And the consequence is that they oppress the people of God. And that time period is referred to as months. All right? Let's see if we can find the same is true in other examples. Revelation 13 and verse 5. Again, it talks about, "There was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue for what? 42 months. It talks about months again. And what happens? At this time, power is given to the beast. Again, you find that Satan is empowered. So when God talks about months, it seems to be focusing on the element that Satan is given power. God gives Satan authority. God allows Satan and his people to exercise certain power over God's people. So when that happens, God speaks of that time period using the word months. All right, the next one we go on to is years. And of course, it is referred to as times in the prophecies. I don't think the prophecies talks about years, but it uses the word times, which really means years. And I think when it talks about years or times, it continues to focus on Satan's warfare. It goes on to talk about Satan's warfare when the damage to the kingdom is not just that the kingdom is oppressed, but the kingdom it seems to be completely defeated. Not just oppression, but serious damage done to the kingdom, where the kingdom is scattered, decimated. Almost seems like it's overthrown. We know that cannot happen, but the beating is terrible. And God refers to those times. God uses the word times to refer to that situation. And let's see if we can find the examples. First time it is used is Daniel 7 verse 25, where it says, "They shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. 1 year, 2 years, 3.5 years. 1 year, 2 years, half year." And what happens in this time? What does it say about the saints? They shall be given into his hand. Complete domination by the beast over God's people. They are given into his hand. They are battered. They are beaten. They are bruised. They are overcome. They are given into the hand of the beast. And whenever this happens, God uses the word times. He describes that time period in terms of times, to our years. Again, in Revelation 12 and verse 14, we find that the church is so completely devastated by Satan that she has to fly into the wilderness. And God provides a place to hide her from the face of the serpent. Because otherwise Satan would completely destroy the church. And this is the time, as we know, when the church was terribly persecuted in what we call the Dark Ages. And again, God describes it as times. Times, and half a time. Then we find it appearing the third time. The phrase appears the third time in Daniel 12 and verse 7. It says, "It shall be for a time, times and a half." And what is the consequence? What happens in this time? "When he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people." The holy people are completely overcome in this period, and their power is completely scattered. So because of the complete domination over God's people, God again speaks of it in terms of time. in terms of years, a time, times, and half a time. The final time period I want us to look at is evening, morning. So what does evening, morning refer to? What is the point of evening, morning? Why does God refer to it this way? I think when he talks about evening, morning, it has to do with the worship of the kingdom. Everything is about the kingdom, right? It's the worship of the kingdom. That's what this phrase evening, morning means. And I'm going to show you why I say this. And it has to do with, of course, the worship of the kingdom has to do with the ministry of Christ. All right? I know this is a bit complicated maybe for some people. For some of us it's a breeze, but I hope everybody is able to follow me. So, here is where we find the phrase evening and morning used. Again, I want to read the verse, the two verses, and I want to put in some words that I believe are important, that they should be substituted. Then I heard one angel speaking, and another angel said to that certain angel which was speaking, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice? Take out daily sacrifice and put in the sanctuary service. I'm going to show you why that is a proper translation. How long shall be the vision concerning the sanctuary service and the transgression of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the people of God to be trodden underfoot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, take out days and put in the words evenings and mornings. He said unto me, unto 2,300 evenings and mornings, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Take out the word cleansed and put in the word restored. So it reads, how long shall be the vision concerning the sanctuary service and the transgression of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the people of God to be trodden underfoot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 evenings, mornings, then shall the sanctuary be restored. This way, the verse makes perfect sense. Now I'm going to explain why I take such liberties and put in those changes. Now, before I do that, let me just remind you of what we just saw. God gives us time in the prophecy in terms of days, weeks, months, years, a logical sequence, days, weeks, months, years, and then the final one, evenings, mornings, which is not as logical because it doesn't fit in with any normal accepted time designation that we use in the day today. We talk about days, we talk about weeks, we talk about months, we talk about years, but we don't talk about evening, morning. So that one is kind of out of sync. And we're going to see why does God use it. Now, these all have to do with prophetic events in the kingdom. And then in the right panel, I'm going to show what causes these events. So for days, for example, it's talking about God's protection of the kingdom. And the cause of it is that God enables. He gave 2 wings to the woman or whatever. He always makes some special protection is not exactly the word I wanted. God's provision, like he says, blessed are the ones who come to the 1335 days. There's a blessing, there's special grace. That's the event that takes place, and the cause is that God personally enables his people. Weeks has to do with God's predestination. Something that God foreordains, predestinates, it cannot be changed. And it has to do, the cause is because it is ordained by God. Like the death of Jesus Christ. Like the 70 weeks given to the Jews. Unchangeable, depending on nobody. That's God's sovereign decision. And he uses weeks to describe that. Months have to do with their kingdom being oppressed. And the reason is because power is given to Satan and his agencies. God allows them to have power. And they use the power to oppress God's people. Years are times, a development on this. The kingdom is not only oppressed, it is scattered, it is defeated, it is beaten. The power of the holy people is scattered. And the reason is because Satan makes war And to some extent, he seems to succeed in this warfare. So those are the 4 time periods and what I believe they mean. What I believe is a spiritual meaning why God uses these times. And then evening and morning. What is this? It's also a kingdom event. It has to do with the worship of the kingdom. So everything is about the kingdom. And what is the cause? The cause of the worship is that Christ is ministering. The ministry of Christ is the focus of this evening morning. Now, why does God describe it as evening morning? Is what we want to look at next. Why does he say evening and morning? Why doesn't he say 2,300 days? Or tell you in terms of times, like, I don't know how many times that would be, but 600 times or whatever, I don't know. If you're talking about years of days, it might be about 6 point something. But anyway, he doesn't talk about days, he doesn't talk about weeks or months or years, he talks about evening, morning. Now, to understand this, I want to remind you of there are 4 prophecies in Daniel. First one is with the image. The head of the image represented Babylon. The belly and the thighs, the breast and the arms of silver represented Medo-Persia. I'm sure everybody, okay, we're on familiar ground. You should be smiling now. The belly and the thighs of brass represented Greece. The legs of iron represented Rome. The feet of iron and clay represented divided Rome, or the Rome of today, which I believe primarily is represented by the European Union. That's my belief, all right? So this was the first prophecy in Daniel. Then you had a second prophecy where these same 4 kingdoms were represented by a lion, a bear, a leopard, a terrible beast, and 10 horns. Then you had a third prophecy where Babylon is missing, but Medo-Persia was represented by a ram, Greece represented by a goat, and Rome was represented by a horn of all things. And that one horn covered everything that followed. Why a horn? Why don't we see another beast? Just like with the second prophecy. You have 4 animals. Why is it that you only have 2 animals and a huge horn? I think I'm seeing a really logical reason, but we'll come to that. Then the 4th prophecy, you had no symbols. You just had people fighting. King of the north, king of the south. That's prophecy number 4. Now let me remind you of what each one of these prophecies represented. Prophecy number 1 talks about a stone being cut from a mountain and the stone smashed the image. And if you look at what the verse says in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 35, it says that the stone that smote the image, look at the bottom, the last 3 lines. The stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel chapter 2 is talking about the kingdom of God taking over the whole earth. It's talking about the territory of the kingdom. Look at the word territory. The territory or the land space is restored to God's kingdom. That's what the prophecy of Daniel 2 is about. It's telling you about the restoration of the land space. So the stone becomes a mountain and fills the whole earth. Chapter 2 is talking about territory. Mark that point, and that is why everything in this image, look at it, is made up of material from the earth. Gold, silver, brass, iron, dirt, stone. Everything is from the ground. So we are talking about the restoration of the territory of the kingdom, or the land space, the geographical kingdom. Then you go to the next prophecy, the next prophecy, Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. And now we see, what do we have? Chapter 7 is talking about the government restored. Look at what the verse says. And there was given him, who? Jesus Christ, the Son of Man, dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. What is it that is restored here? The king is restored. The government is restored. Government of what? the government of the kingdom. God's kingdom being restored. First of all, the first chapter 2, chapter 2 told you about the territory or the land being restored. Chapter 7 now is telling you about the restoring of the king or the government. So, in this case, look at the symbols that are used. A wild beast, a lion, a wild beast, a bear, a wild beast, a leopard, a wild beast, a terrible animal. And then it breaks off into horns. God describes the governments of this world like wild animals, wild beasts. While the true king is described as a son of man, a glorious son of man who is accepted by God. The symbols that God uses represent the point of the chapter. So this chapter is talking about government. Government. And so God shows you that the governments of this world, whether we want to call it democratic or dictatorial or whatever, God represents them as wild animals, savage wild beasts. And God is showing you that the true government is the one that is to be set up by the Son of Man. The third prophecy shows you a ram and a he-goat. And then there's a horn that comes from the head of the he-goat. What is this prophecy about? This prophecy is about the restoring of worship. Remember the other two that went before. The restoring of the land, the territory, the restoring of the king or the government, and now it's the restoring of the worship of the kingdom. Now this makes perfect sense because this chapter talks about the sanctuary, and the sanctuary is the center of the worship of the kingdom. Now look at what it says. Daniel chapter 8. This is the center of Daniel chapter 8. He said unto me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. So this one is talking about the restoration of the worship of the kingdom, or if you want to put it another way, the restoring of the religion of the kingdom. The religion of the kingdom has to do with the sanctuary service. And I want you to notice something. God is continuing to be consistent. Instead of an image now, which would represent the territory, an image of different earth materials, no, that's the territory. Wild beasts, no, that's government. What does he show us now? He shows us animals from the sanctuary, because we are talking about worship and we are talking about religion. And the ram is a sanctuary animal. The ram was used in the sacrifices of the sanctuary. The he-goat was used in the sacrifices of the sanctuary. So God uses a ram and a he-goat because God is saying, okay, now we're talking about worship. Now we're talking about religion. And my goodness, that gives us the answer to one of those questions that was bugging me so much. Number 3 is talking about the restoration of worship or of religion. Now, number 4, of course, doesn't show you any wild beasts or any sanctuary beasts or any image from the earth. Why? All it shows you is people, armies and people. Why? Because now we're talking about the people being restored. God is showing you that the people are being restored. So now he talks about people. He shows you people. And it says in Daniel chapter 12 that at that time, in verse 1, Michael will stand up, the great prince which stands for the children of your people. There shall be a time of trouble. Somebody's unmuted. Somebody's unmuted. Paul, you're unmuted. There shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. And it says, at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. So chapter 12 is talking about the restoration of the people of the kingdom. So you have the kingdom completely restored. The territory is restored. The king is restored. The worship is restored. And finally, the people are restored. This is the meaning of the book of Daniel. This is the pattern of the book of Daniel, why God gives us 4 different prophecies. The focus of each one is different. Now, bearing this in mind, let's go back to chapter 8 and let's try to understand why God says evenings and mornings. Daniel 8, as I pointed out, is about the worship of the sanctuary. As I said, there are 2 animals, the ram and the he-goat, and they are sanctuary animals. Now, out of the head of the goat, there comes 4 horns. And then out of these 4, one is broken off, then 4 come up, and out of one of them there comes another horn that becomes very great, which we say is Rome. Why would Rome be represented as a horn? Why would Rome be represented as a horn? Why not another beast? As a matter of fact, you can tell that Rome is involved here because it says, read the text. He magnified himself to the prince of the host, that is, he lifted himself up to the place of Jesus, and by him the sanctuary service was taken away, and the place of the sanctuary was cast down. This is the work of the papacy, the substitution of the earthly priesthood. And an army was given him against the sanctuary service by reason of transgression. It cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. So we know that this power is Rome. But why is Rome represented as a horn? First of all, why do we see a ram and a he-goat? Well, it is because they are sanctuary animals. And we're talking about worship or religion. Why represent Rome as a horn from Greece? And here is this. As much as we are cautious about AI, it was helpful to me because I asked a question. If chapter 8 is talking about religion, then the horn must be looked at in the context of religion. And I think somebody suggested this to me a long time ago, I don't remember who, and I kind of didn't look at it too closely, but I asked ChatGPT how much of the religion of Greece was transferred to Rome. And ChatGPT told me that a great deal of the religion of Greece was passed over into Rome. Most of us will know that Rome adopted the culture and the religion of Rome. A lot of the Greek gods and the Greek style of worship went over into Rome. So Rome, really, in religion, Rome was an extension of Greece. I didn't know this. If you are looking for Rome to be a political power, it's no way it came from Greece. Rome was independent politically. It conquered Greece politically. But it is even said by historians that Rome conquered Greece politically, but Greece conquered Rome culturally. That is even a statement that has been made by historians. So if you are looking at religion in chapter 8, then you are looking at religious progression. So the religion of Medo-Persia was absorbed by Greece, and you had the ram. But then the religion of Greece was not overcome by Rome. The religion of Greece overcame the religion of Rome. So Rome is an extension of Greece where religion is concerned. You see what I'm saying? So it makes perfect sense in Daniel 8 that Rome is represented as a horn coming out of Greece because we are looking at religious development. So that was very interesting, and it answered a question that has bothered me for a long time. That horn. We're talking about religion. Chapter 8 is talking about religion. And so the last remaining question, why then would God talk about time? And instead of talking about days, weeks, months, or years, he uses morning and evening. And that's the last remaining part of the puzzle. The answer is that evening, morning is sanctuary timing. Sanctuary timing. All right, let me explain what I mean. You know, all the other times have to do with something else, but in Daniel chapter 8, we're talking about religion. That's the key. The whole chapter, that whole prophecy is focused on worship and religion. So the time that God gives us, God also used sanctuary timing. All right, so let me explain myself. And I'm going to go back over something we did sometime in the past, but I'm not going to take as long, for sure. What is the daily sacrifice? That's the first thing, because it says that the horn threw down the daily sacrifice. Now, the word daily sacrifice, I'm going to bring up my Bible and ask you to look at something. In Daniel chapter 8, it says, look at verse 11. He magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. Now I'm going to bring up the Hebrew word. Daily, the word sacrifice is not there. It was added. The word we are looking for is this word, daily. By him the daily was taken away. What is this daily? This is the thing that was taken away, and this is the thing that was to be restored, right? This is the thing that was taken away. The place of the sanctuary was cast down, but the daily is the thing that was taken away, and this is what was to be restored. What is this daily? The number for the Strong's Hebrew dictionary is H8548, and when I click on it, it comes up over here in this box over here. And let me magnify it so we can read it. The Hebrew word is tamid. It's translated as daily, and it means a continuance. They say sometimes it is used to represent the regular sacrifice, but look at what else it means. It means always, it means continual, it means daily, it means perpetual. Perpetual, daily, continual, always. That's what the word tamid means. And what God says is that the little horn will take away the tamid. Now I want to show you where the word is used and what it means. First time it's used in the Bible, second time, third time, fourth time, it has a specific meaning. And I wanted to look at those meanings. Now, instead of going through the whole Bible and doing a complete study in the Bible, it's going to take a long time. I have it already laid out on my PowerPoint here. So let's look at this. And if you want to go and do your own search, fine. But here's what it says. The word tamid. It means, as I said, daily, continually, perpetually, and always. All right? So, it has to do with the sanctuary. Now, most students of the Bible, of the book of Daniel, they agree that it has to do with the daily sacrifice. Look at where the daily sacrifice took place. Out here. Not in the sanctuary, in the courtyard. The daily sacrifice took place at the altar of sacrifice. Remember, the sacrifice was out here. This brown area is the courtyard around the sanctuary. In the sanctuary itself, what you had was a candlestick, an altar of incense, a table of showbread, and in the most holy place, of course, there was the Ark of the Covenant. These were the things that you had in the sanctuary. The altar was not, the altar where the sacrifice was done, the brazen altar, was not in the sanctuary, it was outside. So, if you're talking about the sanctuary worship, it cannot be applying to the daily sacrifice because the daily sacrifice is not in the sanctuary. That's one of the points where I believe that most of these interpreters are wrong. We have to be looking at something that takes place in the sanctuary. It has to be in this area. Now, does the word tamid, the daily, the continually, the always, the perpetual, does it have to do with the sanctuary? Well, when you go to the Bible, I will tell you, the first place that you find the word used in the Bible, the first place is in Exodus 27, 20 to 21. And look at what it says. It refers to the burning of the candles, the candlestick. Tamid. You shall command the children of Israel that they bring thee pure oil olive beaten for the light, to cause the lamp to burn how? Always. Sanctuary service, the lamp was to burn always. The light of that candlestick was never to go out. It was to burn all the time. In the tabernacle of the congregation, that's in the first apartment, without the veil, Aaron and his son shall order it. What? From evening to morning. Hold on. God gives us a time period in which this Tamid was to take place. It was to burn from evening to morning. There's that same evening, morning that we saw in Daniel chapter 8. The oil and the candlestick was to burn, was to be made to flow always from evening to morning. Forever. And this word forever, I think, is also the same word tamid. It means perpetually, forever. All right? That's the first place that we find this phrase used in connection with the sanctuary. All right, let's see if there's another place. Second time it refers to the sanctuary service. Aaron shall burn upon it sweet incense every morning. Where? Upon the altar of incense. Same place in the sanctuary. Every morning, when he dresses the lamps, he shall burn incense upon it. And when Aaron lighted the lamps at what? Evening. There you see evening and morning again. He shall burn incense upon it at what? A tamid, perpetual. There's the word tamid. A perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations. So God is saying there are two things that must never stop. It must take place daily, morning and evening, perpetually, always. And it was the burning of incense on the altar and the lamps to keep burning forever. It was never to stop. It was the worship service that involves the prayer of the people and the imparting of the Holy Spirit. That's what it means. It was never to stop. And again, the third place, the bread on the table. And thou shalt set upon the table showbread before me always. And what do you think that word always is? Of course, it's tamid. Same tamid. All right? So I don't like to fool around Greek and Hebrew, but sometimes it helps. Sometimes, even though you don't understand it, you have to go and dig up a little bit. And it's helpful. All right? So God is saying that the service of the sanctuary, the bread, the incense, the candlestick, it was to be forever taking place. And he specified evening, morning. Now, you go to Daniel 8 and you see where the little horn takes away the tamid, the daily, the perpetual. What does he take away? What does he take away? What he's taking away is the service of the sanctuary. And what it means in literally, he's taking away the ministry of Christ. It was the priest Aaron who was to light the lamps. It was the priest Aaron who was to burn incense and to change the bread. It's the work of Christ that was taken away by the little horn, by the Greek religion introduced into Romanism. It was the Greek religion that replaced Jesus Christ. It was the horn, the great horn, that cast down the sanctuary and took the place of Jesus Christ. And that is what the prophecy is saying. And the question was asked, how long is this to continue? And instead of telling you days or weeks or months or years, God tells you in sanctuary language, 2,300 evening mornings. The services of the sanctuary were to take place evening and mornings, but one evening and morning represented a day. But God gives you in sanctuary language because he's keeping to the principle that Daniel 8 is talking about worship. So he gives you a sanctuary timing, 2,300 evenings, mornings, then the holy place, the sanctuary, will be restored. So, I'm sorry I had to rush this. I have to dash over to the chapel in a moment, but I just hope that I didn't put you to sleep. I hope it was clear enough that you could understand. I have a feeling that sometime in the future I might have to go over this in a little more detail, but I'm just giving it to you raw as the Lord agitated my mind. I mean, I was up this morning at 2 o'clock, can't sleep. I'm there and this thing is going in my head over and over, round and round. By the time I see 4 o'clock and I still can't sleep, it's going in my head over and over. I got up at 4 o'clock and I went and prayed. Then afterwards I got a little nap. And I said, maybe I better talk about this today. So I hope it is something I can get further refinement on, and maybe somebody else might be able to look at it more closely and see some better ways.
Amen.
Yes, but I thank God, because I think little by little he's clearing up some of those blank spots, and I hope we have
Brother
been.
David.
Yes, go ahead, Brother Ian.
I see what you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense. It makes my mind go in a direction that I'm seeing other things too. For example, we know that the bread represents the word, and the spirit and the lamp, the candlestand, represents the spirit. So, and then the work of God on the altar, the incense, the prayers, and those are the things that the little hand took away. But
Yes.
when you cover in Revelation 11, we look at the two witnesses. We see something that is emerging from this also.
Absolutely. So anyway, I have to run. So I want to thank you all for your attentiveness, and I trust and pray that it may have been a blessing.